Ahead, please.
Right.
Okay.
So good evening, everyone, and welcome to London Dialogues. I am Neil, and here on London Dialogues, we host people who have something pertaining to Indic thoughts and philosophy, and we talk and discuss the topic with them. Today, with me, I have Nilesh Nilkanth, who is a prolific researcher and author of ancient Indian history. Welcome, Nilesh. Welcome to London Dialogue.
Namaskar. Namaskar. And
Namaskar.
thank you for organizing this.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance and talk to you. There's a lot that so this is a topic of much interest to me, and there's a lot I'm willing to talk to you. But we'll have some 40 minutes to 1 hour today to have a discussion. And towards the end of the discussion, we'll take few more questions from the audience. So anyone who wants to ask any question to Nilesh can type that in, and we'll pick those questions towards the end. So before we jump into the topic, Nilesh, let me start with you. You are a master's in chemical engineering. You did chemical engineering. You went on to do executive MBA. From there to the journey of somebody who's researching ancient history and theology, how does that happen? How somebody moves from engineering to ancient history?
Okay, no, good question. Well, I would say a simple answer is the love of it. But also, when you begin the journey in any
Mhm.
field, you don't know whether even you are going to like it. So I used to have many interest. I
Mhm.
continue to have many interest,
Right.
and I have dabbled into too many fields, like what they call jack of all, master of none, in that fashion. It so happened that this particular area, somehow I ended up making a series of successes or series of inventions, discoveries, revolutionary discoveries, whatever you want to call it. And so I ended up spending more time on these. So
Yep.
that's how I ended up, and this was definitely one of the areas of my interest.
Right. 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 Interesting. So, and in general, in ancient history and theology, I've done a lot of work on that side.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then right now, you have certain level of authority on the dating of Mahabharata and Ramayana, and in general historicity of the great epics.
Hmm.
So, how you came about getting into that process and discovering and getting generally interested in that space
Yeah, again, a good question, Neil. So you mentioned me as a authority today in that
of
field,
some
and
significance, definitely.
yeah, and that is true. However, I
Hmm.
just wanted to mention that authority is the last thing I want to ever pull anywhere. You know,
Right.
for example, saying, okay, you accept what I am saying because I'm authority, because that's the
Hmm.
authority fallacy. So your question is very relevant. How did I begin with that? See, Professor John Archibald Wheeler, he was a
Hmm.
theoretical physicist and a professor to Richard Feynman, whose name is many people know. And so he explains this like this: if you want to have a blast, the rapture of living, and
Hmm.
when you are on the deathbed, you feel like, okay, I had a good life. And
Right.
if you want to achieve that, or if you want to know about a specific subject, he says, find the toughest unsolved problem in that discipline and then go solve it. In
Hmm.
reality, you may be successful. In reality, you may not be successful, but you will definitely understand that subject well. So, my journey into the historical aspect or the
Right.
chronological aspects of Indian civilization and the key events began with one specific astronomy observations, two lines from the Mahabharata text.
Right.
And very naively, this is what I came across 1995 when I was just finishing my master's.
Hmm.
And naively I thought this is something, I'm going to do it, solve it over a weekend.
Right.
And then it took me 15 years from 1995 to 2009, just these two verses and a scientific demystification of it. And when that happened, it just opened the doors.
Right.
And
Right.
that's usually the nature of revolutionary discoveries. It just suddenly
So, what
opens
are
the
those
vistas.
verses which got you started?
So that comes from, so Mahabharata has 18 parvas, and
Right.
this is just at the beginning of the Mahabharata war. It's
Hmm.
in the Bhishma Parva. And actually, because I'm a student of Bhagavad Gita right from my childhood, like my mother started me with Bhagavad Gita. So I was just out of curiosity trying to locate Bhagavad Gita in the Bhishma Parva, in the Mahabharata. So I
Mhm.
started the first chapter. I don't know, I didn't know where to look for. So I said, let me go until I find familiar verses. Right in the second chapter, no Bhagavad Gita yet. Bhagavad Gita comes like 23rd chapter or
Yeah.
so. I came across this verse which goes something like this: Ya Chaisha Visruta Rajas Trailoke Sadhu Sammata Arundhati Taya Pesha Vasishta Prushtata Kruta.
Yeah.
Is basically Vasudev telling Dhritarashtra that, my dear king, this is just one day before the war begins. And he says this famous in the three words, this
Mhm.
revered Arundhati, she has put her husband Vasishta behind, or she's walking ahead of Vasishta.
Mhm.
And the reason this was interesting is astronomically, only four people had even dared look at this reference. There are like 130 plus different Mahabharata researchers, but they
Right.
had shied away from this verse because they could not explain it. The four people tried to do something with it, but they also came to the conclusion that this is astronomically impossible. That was their conclusion. And
Right.
I was thinking, this is where the Shraddha comes in picture. So I was thinking, why would Vyasa write something? If he wanted to just create some description, he could have gotten away with something very simple.
Right.
Uh, and so that was started my journey.
Right. So I'll just break the conversation a bit. I've sent you the links that you wanted to share with people. So
Okay,
you
all
can
right.
share them. Right.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
So
You can ask the question.
your explanation gives me a good segue to jump into topic straight. So you talked about your interest in the general history of the Indian civilization.
Hmm.
There is much contention on whether what part of the theology or our theological spectrum comes into the history, and
Hmm.
what part is just considered as a fictional or creative writing, which is a part of the cultural heritage that we have.
Right.
And uh, so, uh, where does so the word for these two epics are itihasa, which
Hmm.
loosely can be translated into history. So,
Right.
where do we lie on that? It's history, or it's just the creative writing part of cultural heritage?
Right. Great question again. So traditionally, what we are hearing is that whether it's Ramayana or Mahabharata, they are itihasa. Okay, and
Right.
itihas is definitely more than history.
Yeah.
But even what we understand in the modern sense as a history, the chronological aspect is part of
Mhm.
itihasa. Very
Yeah.
much part of itihasa. Very much part of Purana. Very much
Mhm.
part of all our narratives. It may not be emphasized, and it may
Mhm.
not be the sole purpose of that text, but it is
Yeah.
there. Especially in case of itihasa, because simply iti ha asa means that is how it occurred.
Right.
Okay, and of course it is said in a narrative form, it is said in a story form. So purva vruttam kathayuktam itihasam prachakshate. It is the previous incidents
Mhm.
told in a narrative form, told in a story form. That is what itihas is. So how do you, I mean, great question you ask, how do you distinguish, or how do we separate it out? And that's where the scientific method comes in picture.
Mhm.
So you have to have a theory, and once you conceive a theory in your mind, then you have to come up, the science demands that you have to come up with a generic and universal statement of a theory. That is a basic demand. For
Right.
example, my theory for, say, Mahabharata is that all astronomy descriptions, or my theory is and was just for astronomy evidence,
Mhm.
all astronomy descriptions of the Mahabharata text, entire Mahabharata text, are actual, factual, visual observations of Mahabharata types.
Mhm. Mhm.
This is very generic. This is very universal. I'm not like putting some caveat, some condition which says this particular astronomy is not going to be an astronomy observation. Then it is not scientific. And I'm not saying it appears to be, it could be. In reality, I could be wrong with my theory.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm asserting, I'm saying they are actual, factual, visual observations of the sky. The reason it's important is because immediately with this statement, I am claiming that every single astronomy observations in the Mahabharata text is factually testable.
Mhm.
It's empirically testable,
Right.
right? To answer your that second question, which part may be the creative writing? Well, this particular method is simply going to help us, and it did help me separate the grains from the chaff.
Mhm.
If something doesn't fit, I mean, so only I'm going to look at the astronomy descriptions.
Yeah.
If it doesn't qualify astronomy, that may be creative, that may not be creative. In fact, the astronomy could be creative too. But if it is a creative, the question is, I found close to 300 plus astronomy observations. Are they going to bring me like a jigsaw puzzle and bring it to one date? And what is the probability of that just by coincidence?
Right. So that brings to a very interesting point, that then what you're saying is that the way a story unfolds,
Hmm.
whether that each part of that story or whole narrative is true or not, kind
Hmm.
of become irrelevant to the establishing the historicity. But we are
Hmm.
relying on the fact that given that all the observations, in your case astronomical, in
Hmm.
other case maybe people would refer to something like vegetation is what was referred in terms of Ramayana. So given that
Correct.
all these things are true, then there
Hmm.
is a possible historicity to the
Hmm.
events which are written aligned with them also. That's what kind of the argument goes in that case.
That is correct. And this argument, you summarized it very well. And that argument is not any different
Hmm.
than is a argument for any scientific theory,
Right.
whether it is Copernicus, Kepler, Maxwell, Einstein. Uh, Richard Feynman puts it very well. He says science is not about being assuredly confident about certain thing. It's just not possible.
Right.
He says one place, we know a lot more than science can ever prove.
Yeah.
And when he says we know a lot more in a subjective conviction sometime too, sometime
Hmm.
even in an objective fashion, but science may not know the causality. So then what is the science? It is about more likely versus less likely.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what science is, right?
Yeah.
And so what I did in the Mahabharata or case of Ramayana or even Rigveda dating, it passes all the test of scientific method with flying colors.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So then that comes a very different question. I'm actually kind of diverting from the main topic, and we'll come back immediately on
That
this.
is good.
Uh,
Yeah.
while I was preparing for this session and I was talking to people that are going to host the session, one question came up that it's a theological belief. It's part of
Mhm.
your theological spectrum of Indic people. So, in that context, why at all there a need
Hmm.
to kind of get a scientific validation on it? Do we at
Correct.
all need to talk about that?
Ah, no, again, a wonderful question, and I'm liking this informal way of doing things. Absolutely, Neil. I would say, and not because I'm seeing you on the screen, I'm praising you because on your face. No, very rarely I get these questions.
Right.
These are extremely relevant questions. So I said, where is the need to? I mean, it's a theological. It can be theological belief, and
Mhm.
theological belief doesn't need any other support. I mean, you
Right.
can just believe it. Joseph Campbell, the great American, he
Mhm.
says, I don't need faith for I have experience, which is to say, you can take things on the belief, on a
Yeah.
faith based, you can also take things on experience.
Mhm.
And if you have experience, then you don't need a belief. That is one reason to
Yeah.
actually test these things and see if they are valid by means that one may be interested in.
Right.
But now if you're talking theology, theology may be even a wrong word, but if you think of a Hindu dharma, the dharma
Yeah.
tradition versus the religious tradition,
Mhm.
whereas the religions might have this pseudo or actual conflict with so-called scientific methods,
Right.
uh, the dharma insist on it. I mean, our shad darshanas,
Mhm.
the pratyaksha anumana, upamana, shabda, anupalabdhi, and
Mhm.
arthotpatti. I mean,
Mhm.
these are like solid pramanas. Say, think of a Bhagavad Puran, which is
Mhm.
dedicated to what? Bhakti. I mean, people
Ah.
will think the highest of just a belief is enough, like bhakti. The whole Bhagavad Puran is emphasizing bhakti. That even that Puran, you see Krishna telling to Uddhava,
Yeah.
say science expects a triangulation of explanation, prediction, testing.
Right.
Krishna is demanding a quadrangulation. He says Shruti Pratyaksham Aitiyam Anumanam Chatushtayam Pramaneshu Anavasthanat Viparyasa, Vishyate. Meaning, if you don't do the quadrangulation, you might actually, it will lead you to confusion, delusion, mithya.
Right. Right.
So to answer your question, that is one reason. The second one is Satyameva Jayate. I mean, you want to always find the truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, you always want to find the truth. And so Shabda Praman, that is again a misconception many times that has somehow entered and has almost become very stagnant in a Hindu dharma, I would say, right now, the current Hindu dharma. which is to say people confuse Shabda Praman as the proof. Shabda Praman is the ultimate proof. That is absolutely wrong. You will not find the basis for it. In a darshanas, you will not find the basis for it. In our philosophy, we will not find the basis. Shabda Praman is also valuable if empirical proof is not available. Like say Punarjanma, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, now we are getting some evidence in indirect ways. Otherwise, even Shankaracharya, he's also saying that Atma is a Swaswarup, you cannot find a proof for it. But that same Adi Shankaracharya, he says, Jnanam na Purusha Tantram, Kintu Vastu Tantram. The particular object, its own nature will tell you what it is, not just somebody's opinion.
Right. So, fine. So I'll now come back to our core topic, and we'll get onto the timeline of Mahabharata and Ramayana, and how we look at it, how we calculate it. So before I jump into the actual timeline, and how the process works, what are the mainstream academic thoughts on it, on the historicity and the timelines?
Right. Okay. Well, no, great question again. Again, we have to define what the mainstream academic is. So let's say, I mean, do you have any specific definition for mainstream academic?
No, I don't. I mean,
Okay.
what is popular? What is it in
Right.
most people are looking at?
Yeah. So if you look at mainstream academic in the sense of, say, Western Indology, okay, so the discipline of, say, last 150 years, 200 years, something like that. And then if you consider people in India, so it doesn't have to be physically in the West, but the folks who essentially follow these Western methods.
Yeah.
Okay. They are stuck into two domains. One is the Aryan invasion theory. So everything that they put the chronology on for Indian events is clouded by the glasses of Aryan invasion theory. So everything has to happen after 1500 BC. And the Rigveda has to start there. So then things has to go in some chronological fashion, because that's how they conceive it. And therefore, they will put Mahabharata Ramayana into somewhere 200 BC to 400 CE.
Right.
Okay. Also, to them, it's not a historical event. To them, it's a kavya. It's like a imaginary story. So they look at when it was written. That is all they are looking at. Now, what is the evidence that they have? Zilch. Zero evidence for any of their things, either for Aryan invasion or for these claims on the Mahabharata Ramayana. So that's one academia. Now let's look at, say, some of the people who are working in the Mahabharata research area. They may not be always in academia. They may be loosely connected with academia. One is like archaeology. And archaeology, they do a lot of hard work. But I would say my experience with archaeological inferences is very unpleasant. They do a good job of digging things, finding things, identifying things, dating things. But then taking those things and doing the triangulation with what is said in, say, Itihasa or any text, and then using the logic, Tantra Yukti, Tarka Shastra, and Vijnana Buddhi, I'm willing to say that it's a royal disaster. It's a royal disaster. So, for example, let's say in Kurukshetra or Mathura or Hastinapur, they find a pot. They dig somewhere and they find some pottery, like painted graveware pottery or black polished, new black polished pottery. They date it. They find some metal objects. They may date it. And then they suppose they date it and it comes to 1000 BC or 2000 BC or 3000 BC, doesn't matter what it is. They just go like a eureka, bingo, I found this in Kurukshetra, I found this in Hastinapur, I found it in Mathura. These places are related to Mahabharata. So therefore Mahabharata happened in 1000 BC, 2000 BC. There is a huge fallacy. There is a scientific problem with that. There is a logical problem with that. So that is what the mainstream is, if you consider archaeology as a mainstream. Now, just to quickly summarize, taking all these different approaches, so therefore the dating of Mahabharata kind of ranges from 400 CE. This is Professor Hopkins of Harvard, about 100 years ago, all the way to 7300 BCE. One of the great astronomers of India, Shankar Balakrishna Dikshit, about 125 years ago. So there you go. That's your range from 400 CE
and that's
to
a very
7.
wide range. So I would actually want to divide these group now in two. When you have mentioned it, you're talking about that there is Western Indology academic space where researchers are and people are studying the space with archaeology part of that. And then you're talking about independent researchers who are coming out of interest.
Correct.
who have read a lot or have understanding of scriptures, and they are also coming out. So
Sure.
is there a clear difference between the two group when it comes to the process or the timing or the way they are doing it?
Yeah, I mean, your question is great question. I would say the answer is bit loaded. So,
Mhm.
in fact, I talked yesterday about that somewhere else. So think of it: the Western academia would be essentially saying 400 CE to 200, say 400 BC, and they're done.
Mhm.
They don't
Right.
want to go before that. Okay. Let's look at the archaeologist. They will go from 800 BCE, and I'm talking their actual claims. Okay, so Professor
Mhm.
B.B. Lal, I mean the great
Yeah.
archaeologist, right,
Yeah.
will go from say 800 BCE to possibly 2000 BCE.
Right.
Okay, based on when the Iron Age began, their assumptions of Iron Age, and those
Mhm.
assumptions have already been falsified. But
Mhm.
when they proposed it, that was the logic. Then we have people, the third group, and I'll tell you what is the similarity of their techniques. The third group, which is the most popular group. So if this is ever decided by voting, and that's what
Mhm.
many people propose, and it's very illogical and unscientific, is
Right.
if it's to be decided by voting, then there is a huge group out of 130 plus different claims, like 60 plus 670 or so, stuck in the 3000 BCE plus minus 100 years. This is the
Yeah.
huge group. And
Mhm.
what is the logic? The traditional assumption of the Kali Yuga beginning in 3000 BC or 3001 BCE.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, and then there are like 4 or 5 people where I would fall into, like 5000 BCE category, and then 7300. So
Mhm.
I'll come to that 5000 in a minute. But this 3000 BC is very important to understand. So they start with the assumption of beginning of Kali Yuga. I have no problems. I don't think you should have a problem with that too. That's a reasonable assumption,
Mhm.
because after all, Mahabharata text does talk about it occurring at the interface of Dwapara and Kali
Right.
Yuga.
Right.
Okay. However, I'll tell you this. I assert, meaning it's backed by evidence, that there is not even a single reference,
Mhm.
single astronomy reference, single archaeology reference, single hydrology reference, single oceanography reference, single climatology reference, single genetic, you just go on. Not
Mhm.
even a single reference in Mahabharata text that will decisively allow anyone to bring the timing to 3000 BC. And they all, the 60, 70 folks are 3000 BC plus minus 100 years. I
Mhm.
am saying not even a single reference that will allow them to arrive at 3000 BC plus minus 1000 years.
Right. Right.
Okay, none, not even a single.
On that, I'm going to now ask you, what are your dates?
Okay, good. So my date is 5561 BCE.
Mhm.
So for us, so that's like 5561 BC plus 2020, right?
Yeah.
7582 years. For
Yep.
simplicity, more than 7500 years. But it's not a generic number, it's a very specific year. I mean, if somebody even asked me, like, okay, so Nilesh, are you saying we're about 5561? I'm saying not about. I mean, it cannot be 5565 BC,
Mhm.
and it cannot be 5570 BC. The Mahabharata evidence is that accurate, that precise.
Right. So, what is this process? How we come
Hmm.
to dating?
Good,
How we
good,
get to that?
good question. Let me ask you, and this is not a counter question to trick you.
Mhm.
Have you happened to have used a vernier caliper
I
before?
have.
Have you know what
Yes.
that is? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Now I don't know if all our audience members know it, but it is something to measure the thickness or
Yeah.
a length or something of some object, right? To a very
Yeah.
accurate and precise. It
Yeah.
has got two scales. So first you take those prongs, you put the object there, take approximate reading on the main scale, and then on
Yeah.
the secondary scale you take the which line matches with that, do some
Yes.
calculation, you get precise and accurate. If when you put the object between the two prongs, if you do it in a wrong fashion, okay, it doesn't matter how accurate and precise you measure on the vernier secondary scale, you're going to get a answer which is very precise but wrong because
Mhm.
you did not put this object. So to explain the process, doesn't matter which discipline of science you use, I use astronomy, you have to identify those references which gives you the approximate area first.
Mhm.
And this observation that I mentioned, this Arundhati-Vasistha observation, was like a magic. And that's not the only observation. By the way, there are 60 other observations which help you give you approximate range. But the beauty of this observation is it's so decisive that right now all the other Mahabharata researchers who don't agree with my date, they are fighting day and night with Arundhati-Vasistha. It is their nightmare and a daymare, if the word can be used. Okay. So what this Arundhati-Vasistha observation did simply is it said, because Vyasa is saying at the time of Mahabharata war, Arundhati is walking ahead of Vasistha. The four out of 130 astronomers or Mahabharata researchers looked at it. They said it's impossible in the astronomy sense. I worked on it for 15 years. And finally, when I demystified, what I showed is that Arundhati actually does appear
Uh,
to walk ahead of Vasishtha.
Nilesh, one intervention. I think for the audience, you'll have to first give a bit about Arundhati and Vasishtha and
Sure.
astronomical relation.
Very, very good. My apologies. So we are not talking of Arundhati and Vasishtha as a man and a woman. Well,
Yeah.
actually, they were a long time ago. And then the stars in the sky were named after them. That is an Indian tradition. It's not a Western tradition to name stars after. I mean, they would have borrowed it. So those people, I mean, people have to have some familiarity, and thank you for reminding me. So those people who would be familiar with Saptarshi in the sky, in the northern hemisphere, northern direction. So it looks like a pan and a handle. So a rectangular pan and has a handle.
Yeah.
Total of 7 stars. So pan has got 4, handle has got 3, and the middle star of the handle is called Vasishtha, or in the modern astronomy, Mizar. Next to that is a small star, that is Arundhati or Alcor in modern astronomy. And right now, if we look at through the night, it will rise because it's right now not circumpolar. So it actually does go below horizon, the whole part of the panhandle. So when they are coming up in the northeast, and they will go around the North Pole in anti-clockwise direction, we will see Vasishtha is walking ahead, Arundhati is behind. Walking meaning what? Their position doesn't change with respect to each other, but they'll go like this, like the arms of a wall clock, something like this. And so Vasishtha is walking ahead. That is the case now. That was the case 1,000 years ago, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 plus years ago. Vyasa is saying exactly opposite is the scenario at the time of Mahabharata war. So if we put the evidence, if we put the triangulation of logic and everything together, explanation, prediction, testing, it tells us Mahabharata war did not happen in last 6,500 years.
Right.
But then the question is, when did it happen? And Arundhati gives you a certain time bracket. It says Arundhati could be seen walking ahead of Vasishtha for any individual in the northern hemisphere, looking at the sky in the northern direction, only between this 5,000 year period from 10,248 BCE to 4636 BCE. It can be said with that accuracy.
Right.
So it has to be between those years. And so Arundhati Vasishtha doesn't give you 5561 BC. It tells you that bigger scale of the vernier caliper. Hey, approximately you must look for it here.
Right. So, and I'm just being devil's advocate now here. How do you, in the text, which is not expressly saying that this is astronomy and this is the rest of the story, you identify that this reference is an astronomical reference and this reference is actual people reference? How you differentiate that in a text?
Okay, because the text actually says in explicit terms that it is an astronomy reference.
Right, because I'm asking that question because a lot of contention on these topics come from the fact that people say that in the text, this part is not acceptable as a astronomical reference, or this astronomy is acceptable.
Correct. And good. No. But people are objecting. See, people don't object to other astronomy references. So, for example, take the second adhyaya of the Bhishma Parva, where this reference comes. There are 4 astronomy references. 2 references above Arundhati Vasishtha reference, 1 reference just after Arundhati reference.
Yeah.
All the Mahabharata researchers who claim that they have come to their claim for the year of Mahabharata war using astronomy, they use remaining 3 references.
Yeah.
Okay, not this.
So why so?
Because they couldn't explain it.
Okay.
Okay. Now, how unscientific, how illogical is that? No one is calling them bluff. Okay. I mean, it is such a disaster. The buck stops there.
Yep.
It's like a red signal. Don't go further. Because in science, it's perfectly all right to say that I have 30 observations. Out of that, 25 match for my theory, 5 do not match for my theory. That has happened in the case of Ptolemy. That has happened in case of Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo. That is why somebody else came and tried to improve further.
Right.
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 But in fact, if you go, and maybe in this series, you should get other Mahabharata researchers with a claim and
Yes.
ask them
That's
this
right.
question: under what circumstances your theory will be falsified? What if someone can come and show that this is not the case, that your theory will be falsified? So to answer your question, no, actually not just in this chapter. The Arundhati-Vasistha is described, is discussed in the entire Mahabharata many times.
Right.
And the intention is very clear that they are astronomy references. Their position in the sky, in the area of Swati Nakshatra, in the area of a Dhruva, close to the Dhruva pole star, is
Right.
all mentioned. And of course, I don't have a presentation here, and that's not the
No.
intention today. But if you look at even those sub-references, you find how marvelous is the descriptions specifically for a Mahabharata time, 6
Right.
millennium BC.
Okay. Okay. I have a cue from audience, and
Sure.
they would also want to hear about the timing of Ramayana.
Okay.
And this specific cue says because there are some interpolation in text which dates it after Buddha.
Hmm.
So,
Okay.
where do you stand on that? So, we have
Okay.
Mahabharata, which you're saying that 650 BC in that era, and then Ramayana. Where do we stand when it comes to Ramayana, both in terms of actual historicity and then the timeline?
Okay. So historicity in the sense of, you mean the
The Ramayana happened,
interpolation,
like that's
inter yeah.
so. First thing is that there is huge contention. Like Ramayana and Ram has been in the center of a lot of argument, and
Yeah.
there have been people who are outright rejecting that even the historicity of it at all. And
Right.
then there are people who are strongly asserting that no, these are all actual events.
Right.
So
Okay.
where I
Yeah.
sit on that based on research and academy.
Okay. So see, in subjective conviction, so the good point again, argument versus theory. I mean, people
Yeah,
can argue anything, argue
right.
any position, and you can make the other person look foolish, appear foolish, make a point, make a name for yourself, instant
Mhm.
popularity. You can achieve all of that. Theory is a different animal altogether, because theory demands that not only you state a theory and run away, but then as soon as you state a theory, the evidence has to become empirical. Then you have to test the evidence and you have to put the score on the board. How
Right.
does your theory do? So the Buddha insertion of Ramayana, after I'll come to that in a minute. But so what is my theory for Ramayana?
Mhm.
Exactly same as Mahabharata. Just replace the word Valmiki Ramayana. All astronomy descriptions of Valmiki Ramayana are actual, factual, visual descriptions of the sky
Mhm.
of Ramayana times.
Right.
In case of Ramayana, Valmiki Ramayana, which is much smaller than Mahabharata, I found close to 600 astronomy references.
Wow.
Right now, 2 days ago, my good friend, I'll not mention the name, not that that's a secret, but that just to avoid digression, he mentioned that there are no astronomy references, or there is no astronomy reference of a pole star in
Mhm.
the Ramayana.
Mhm.
Okay, I like to say that he must be reading a very different Ramayana than what I'm aware of. Okay, so the point is, I mean, people can argue anything, but
Right.
Nyaya Darshana tells us that argument is not to be taken seriously unless the other party has also a alternate claim.
Mhm.
Otherwise it's a vitanda. Have you heard the word vitandavad?
Yeah.
Westful.
Yeah.
Nyaya Darshana says so pratipaksha sthapana hino vitanda. If you are objecting to someone but you don't have your own specific position, you are wasting everybody's time,
Right. Right.
and the person is to be rebuked and removed from the debate if that happens. But back to this.
Yeah.
So Valmiki Ramayana, I used the same process. I looked at those 600 references, and again, like a vernier caliper type, there are some references which give you approximate range. This overlaps. There are 4, 5, 6 references. They give you overlapping region. Starts from like a 10,500 BC to like 17,000 BC, and with other references, it really comes down to 10,000 BC to 14,000 BC. And then
Right.
I use like additional 300 plus references. It brings us to the first thing I found in the case of Ramayana is the year of Ram Ravan Yuddha. That
Mhm.
is 12,209 BC, so more than 14,000 years ago.
Okay.
Okay, and then using the other Ramayana evidence, the chronological clues like Ram going to the forest for 14 years and so on, other astronomy evidence, you can decide the dating of Rama as 12,240 BC.
Right, right. So that brings us to a very interesting point where we are
Yeah,
putting Mahabharata in the circa 6,500 and
correct.
Ramayana into 12,200 circa in that
Yeah,
ballpark, separating
yeah,
them with roughly 6,000 years between them.
right. 7,000. Yeah,
Yeah, 7,000 years between them. When we talk about this in the terms of how the scriptures put it, one happened in Treta Yuga, another happened in Dwapar Yuga. And if
yes.
you look at the calculation of Yuga, they should typically be separated by a million years based on
Hmm,
the years in the sense of the way Yuga is defined and written in chronological sense, right? So
correct.
how you reconcile those two things, a million year and 7,000 year?
Yeah, yeah. No, great question. See, the dogma by definition are so deeply entrenched that
Mhm.
suppose a random Indian person, if you wake him or her up from the middle of the night and ask them what is the duration of a Kali Yuga,
Mhm.
you will get the correct answer. I mean, the answer is correct in the sense it will match with everyone else, but it is a wrong answer, and I'll explain that. The answer you will get is 432,000 years. Would you have given the same answer? I think so,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. That's
432,000. And then we have that ratio of 1 is to 2 is to 3 is to 4, which means the Dwapara is twice that, which is
yeah.
864,000. Okay. So that is where your question is originating. Great
Yeah.
question. So for a minute, you are saying, forget it. I mean, I accept whatever the Ramayana for a Mahabharata for a minute. So
Yeah.
5561 BC, hey, be my guest. But
Yeah.
now I'm also saying Ramayana 12,209. So like only 7,000 years separated. Whereas the Dwapar Yuga, which what separates Ramayana and Mahabharata,
Yeah.
for this definition is 864,000 years.
Right.
Let's quickly, I mean, I'm going to make it very short. I have given enough presentations on this Yuga. I call it Yuga enchilada. We have made a mess out of this beautiful concept of Yuga.
Mhm.
But briefly, there are 4 types of Yuga, and there could be many sub classifications. But I call them theoretical, practical, chronological, and philosophical.
Mhm.
Okay, so the practical and philosophical are not of a they have a sense of a time, but they are more of a physiology or psychological in nature. For example, a devotee, like the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has said, in his Shikshashtaka, that when he feels the separation from Krishna, even for a fraction of a second, it feels like a yuga. That's the
Right.
emotional state. So we'll not go into that. But even the theoretical and chronological definition, that is where this problem comes, that what you're asking. And how do we reconcile that? There is a wonderful explanation to reconcile it. This very idea of Kali Yuga of 432,000 and twice that is a Dwapar, 864, is, do you know where it comes from? It
No.
comes from the astronomy text. It is a purely astronomy based mathematical formulations
Mhm.
to explain, to track, to communicate precise and accurate orbital periods of planets. It
Okay.
comes in a Surya Siddhanta, it comes in a Aryabhatiya. They
Mhm.
use the same words like a Kali Yuga, Dwapar, Treta, and so on. But that has absolutely nothing to do with using that unit for chronological purposes, to track, to separate historical events. But that
Mhm.
has exactly what has happened. And therefore, somebody using a unit from a theoretical category of Yuga for chronological purposes is what creates this problem. If you understand that distinction, there is no problem.
How we separate? So I think you would have to shed some light on that distinction. That how we distinguish between two kind of yoga that you're talking about.
Right. I mean, there are many ways to explain it, but let's say people, now that I have deciphered the dating of Ramayana, Mahabharata,
Mhm.
a very novice question I get, sir, please tell me what was the year of the Matsya Avatar?
Right. Right.
Okay. Now I'll tell you,
Actually,
this is, yeah,
actually,
go ahead.
sorry. I was going to ask you that Mahishasur Mardini in some way or Devi in some way get referenced in both Ramayana and Mahabharata, and in a
Right.
context that it's an event that has happened much before
Yes.
Mahabharata and Ramayana is happening.
Yeah.
And that would probably put it a million years or 2 million years before both the event of Mahabharata and Ramayana. So,
Yeah.
how do you also kind of bring that into the context and say, what is the historicity of that now?
Correct. So I'll explain that. I'll come to Mahishasur in a minute. But let's take
Right.
Matsya Avatar, which has the
Right.
similar flavor. Just don't want to
Right.
mix too many.
Yeah.
So, for example, Matsya Kurma Varaha, in that theoretical framework, so in an Indian framework, we have this astronomy long scales of a Mahayuga,
Right.
4.32 million years, right?
Yeah.
Which comes out what is that? 4,500 years is the age of the earth, and
Right.
that matches with the Brahma's day and so on and so
Yeah.
forth.
Yeah.
Okay, coincidence or real, doesn't matter. That's a different subject. Um, but take Matsya Avatar. Now, Matsya Kurma Varaha Nrsimha, if we take this as a evolutionary time frame, it falls from the theoretical framework, not the chronological framework. So when it comes to, by the time it comes to Rama and Krishna, yeah, we can talk about the historical events. But when we go back, at some point, we don't know, we are clueless. And
Mhm.
that is when we still need a framework to understand. You will find that in the Puranas all over, even the Ramayana, Mahabharata, how the whole world began. It began with the wish of the, like Nasadiya Sukta from Rigveda.
Right.
What does Nasadiya Sukta says? Nobody knows.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if that answer is not satisfactory, then they say that Parama Adhyaksha, the Parabrahma created it,
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
Siddhanta like that. So it is even a wrong to ask the question in which year Matsya Avatar came into being,
Mhm.
because it's a, for example, it's like asking the question that in a evolution, the animal evolution, the living entity evolution on the earth. Okay, what was that year when the protein turned into a unicellular organism?
Right.
Like we say, well, it happened 400 and 4,000 million years ago. That's all we can say.
Mhm.
We cannot give a date. It's the same problem. So from that, something that was meant for um, astronomy purposes, totally different purpose,
Mhm.
okay, for finding the time, but we are using it for chronology. That is the problem. Whereas a Treta Yuga and Dwapar Yuga, Kali Yuga can be understood in many different ways. I'll tell you, we are talking of Mahabharata, right, or
Right.
Ramayana itself. I'll quickly give you their own definitions. Mahabharata has 5 different definitions of a yuga.
Mhm.
Ramayana also has a definition of yuga. Do you know what Ramayana says?
What?
When there is a dharma, adharma gets over, adharma triumphs over dharma, it is a Kali Yuga. When dharma triumphs over adharma, it is a Satya Yuga.
Mhm.
Now, does this have a time? Like, is there a time calendar schedule, like when the adharma is going to triumph over dharma? No.
Right. Right.
Mahabharata gives a good answer. It says Raja Kalasya Karanam. It says multiple times. It is the administrator, it is the Raja, and how he administers that may decide a yuga.
Mhm. Yeah.
And Mahabharata gives example. It says when Bhishmacharya was ruling, when these Dhritarashtra and Pandu were very young, he was ruling so beautifully that by his rule he brought Kali Yuga, sorry, he brought Satya Yuga. That is
Yeah.
the statement of Mahabharata.
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
Parshurama brought Satya Yuga. Or Ramayana says Rama with Rama Rajya brought Satya Yuga. Now they brought Satya Yuga in what? Dwapar Yuga and Kali Yuga. And so it is the Treta Yuga of a Ramayana and Dwapar Yuga of a Mahabharata is used in a different sense. It is not used in the sense of the astronomy mathematical formulation. Sorry, that was a long discussion,
No,
but
no, no, that was wonderful. That was wonderful. If anyone has any question, please start typing them in now. So we'll ask those to Nilesh before we close in. What I would move to Nilesh from here is that what is the importance of this work itself of identifying the
ah,
historicity of the timeline of
right.
these great epics in context of the Indian culture, Indian civilization now and going ahead?
Okay. Yeah, no, great question. I mean, the answers can be long. I'll try to be brief. So, for example, the colonialist tendencies when they were working with India, I mean, you would have heard these quotes. He says,
Mhm.
if you want to make a certain race, certain people, a certain country, a slave country, all you have to do is destroy their history, destroy their true sense of history.
Right.
In that, and that has exactly what has happened. The British were very successful. I mean, credit to them, very
Mhm.
effectively through the Macaulay system and many other very soft power, you can say,
Yeah.
like taking the, even as simple as astronomy, taking the prime meridian from
Yeah.
Ujjain and taking it to Greenwich, London. I mean, where you are right now, they they could just change the whole game, right? Who is in
Yeah.
control, right? So we
Mhm.
have to fix that. We have to fix, not to put anyone down, we have to fix in the sense of satyameva jayate, to know the truth. for simple
Right.
things, but even for the grand narrative of India in that
Mhm.
sense, and not in a very jingoistic fashion. For example, if whatever the truth is, wherever the evidence takes us, and a new evidence comes up, and that forces us to change what we believe, then we should change it. So that's
But
one. Now, yeah, go ahead.
no, go ahead, please.
But the bigger benefit of this, so for example, it has many aspects. I'll take a positive and negative. So this whole Aryan invasion nonsense, I don't call it theory, it's a dogma. Okay,
Yeah.
it doesn't qualify any of the 5 tests of scientific method or scientific theory. If you just take the Ramayana dating or Mahabharata dating 5561 BC, what is the Aryan invasion argument? That so-called Aryan came from somewhere outside India to inside India sometime after 2000 BCE, and with them they brought Sanskrit, which was used, or precursor to Sanskrit, which
Mhm.
was used to write Rigveda and then Mahabharata and Ramayana. What nonsense! I mean, the evidence inside from Ramayana and Mahabharata decisively that can stand against any test from any person around the world, any scientific minded person or logical minded person, shows that a Sanskrit based civilization existed in India long before this nonsense, the claim of Aryan invasion. So, just
Right.
the dating of Mahabharata, poof, that destroys the Aryan invasion. So, in a negative sense, it helps. In a positive sense, we start appreciating the science, culture, technology, civilizations of India in the
Mhm.
right perspective. Say, for
Right.
example, if I would have said today, I mean, hey, I would like to come and meet you next week in London, or Wednesday, you would not be surprised. You know that I can take a 6 7 hour flight and be there.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what if I would have said this 400 years ago, that I want to come and see you mid next week from Atlanta and meet you in London? You would have laughed at me.
Yeah.
I'm saying the timing gives the context of the available science, available technology, or even
Mhm.
the appreciation of technology. I'll give you one quick example.
Mhm.
Sushruta Samvita, and Sushruta talks about the rhinoplasty, which went from India to Europe, and then it became big famous and all that. What if I can show you, which I have done, by the way, with the work like this, that
Yeah.
Sushruta is definitely more than 8,000 years old.
Mhm.
Okay, the Wikipedia says 600 BC. Recently, Columbia University said, oh yeah, we agree that Sushruta was a 600 BC,
Mhm.
Sushruta's timing. And everyone in India, not everyone, most of the people in India were very gaga. Oh, Columbia is now accepting. What nonsense! I mean, Columbia and technology and medicine in ancient India, we start seeing in the right perspective, and that
Right.
is the benefit of the chronology aspect.
Right. So now I have a few comments and question. I'll start taking
Sure.
them before we close. So I have from Jasmine Sa. Regarding timing of Yuga, Swami Shri Yukteswar Giri, in the introduction to his book, The Holy Science, explains the mess about the timing of Yugas very logically. I
Hmm.
mentioned the great sage Sri Yukteswar only due to his stellar standing among the gurus of modern India.
Hmm.
Wondering if Sri Nilkanth Oak is aware of his explanation and what you make of it. In case you haven't come across, we humbly request to look into that. So
Okay.
we'll
Yeah.
have a take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a very well aware of the work of Sri Yukteswar Giri. I mean, the Kriya Yoga tradition. I know many of the disciples in that tradition, and I have personally met them. I mean, I'm on like a WhatsApp or email kind of communication with them. I have discussed this subject with them also. Quickly, I'll tell you the good aspect of it.
Mhm.
This Yukteswar thing. The model, actually, the sequence of it I like, which is to say, it's a sinusoidal type of thing. Meaning,
Mhm.
say, what is that? Kali, Dwapar, what is that? The Treta and Satya, then Satya Yuga again, and then it goes down like a sinusoidal curve. I
Right.
like that in the sense suddenly the things don't go from extremely bad to extremely good, and so that model may have some benefit. Other than that, based on like the chronology of Mahabharata or Ramayana that I have figured out, based on the internal evidence, the
Mhm.
Yukteswarji's model does not fit at all.
Okay.
So if somebody insists on it, it is their job to fit it, or to
Okay.
show, forget that model for a minute, show why my dating is wrong. Okay,
Right.
that is what they need to do. And what
Right.
was it that what do I make of it? So it's a beautiful book. There is one book, The Lost Star, and I don't know if Jasmine ji knows about it. The Lost Star, based on the Yukteswarji's theory. It has a lot of merit. I have that book. Walter is his first name, the author. and I would encourage people to read it. But that is a Shabda Praman. As far as the Mahabharata Ramayana goes, it should not be confused because it doesn't match.
Right, right. I have from Naresh Joshi. Fascinating listening to you once again, Shri Nilesh ji. Thank you for your explanation on Yuga dogma. We're having a conversation with others about putting Yuga dogma in your back pocket. How would you suggest we go about it? Because this seems like an inertia even Einstein would struggle to explain.
Well, that is true. And I would say, Naresh ji, and of course, Neil, you too. See, that is where many other strategic minds have to come in. So, for example, they have to study my work in the case
Mhm.
of Yuga here, be convinced of it. If they're not convinced, they can critique it. They can come up with
Right.
a better model. I'm open to all of that. But once they suppose they are convinced of my work, then I think they need to put these creative heads to figure it out how to take it to the masses.
Right.
And definitely they cannot leave it to me. I mean, that's just one person cannot do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Kapil Majumdar says they say Mahabharata is like a lesson in business or commercial life, Ramayana
Hmm.
in domestic or personal life. So, what is the main lesson or lesson for us to learn from both epics to take home and enrich our today?
Very good question. Quickly, and I can talk about other texts too, but just I'll limit to epics. Ramayana has everything. Mahabharata has everything. There is a verse in Mahabharata that what is it that is not there in Mahabharata, which is to say
Mhm.
almost anything that you want to talk about is in Mahabharata. Broadly speaking, Ramayana is a niti vichar, the absolute morals. Okay, to
Okay.
understand absolute morals, Ramayana is a beautiful text. Mahabharata has everything, but if you go and look at it time and again, you will find Mahabharata is a karma yoga vichar. The emphasis is on doing the duty, endurance in conduct, or
Right.
what you call achar saishnuta, like never giving up. So those are the two broad messages that come from these texts.
All right. From Prabhakar Kumar, we have a question. MBH Mahabharata talks of Pandavas interacting with Kuber and other deities on the earth. Might it be possible that Lokas were also on earth?
Hmm.
Same question for Vijay Yatra of Ravan to look different Lokas, including Patal and Vali.
Hmm.
Are they different places on earth? If
Hmm.
yes, then why Arjuna seems to ride down from sky to meet Pandavas on the Gandhamadan Parvat?
Okay, a great question. I'm going. I mean, it can be a very long answer. I will give a short answer.
Yeah.
Just my conviction, and based on not just a subjective conviction, but based on the research that I have done, the geography of a Mahabharata times, geography of a Ramayana times, and whatnot. These are all events happening on the earth.
Right.
Okay, there can be a component where somebody in a meditation can go to another planet. That's possible, but Professor C.K. Raju has shown that that is, at least scientifically speaking, that
Mhm.
is possible for a mind, that is possible for the higher subtle powers, that is not possible for the body, okay,
Right.
to go to other planets kind of thing in a short time. And what was the question there? Okay, so why does it show like some ride coming from the top?
Yeah.
Remember what is the itihasa. Dharmartha kama mokshanam upadesham samanvitam purvavrittam kathayuktam itihasam prachakshate. So it is a factual historical events, but just so that we remember, like so that they are told to us in a katha form, and it is
Mhm.
told to us as a arshak kavya, as a poetry. So some embellishments will come that makes us remember. Like, so Prabhakarji remembered that
Mhm.
Arjuna coming from the top, that is
Yeah.
because of that
Yeah.
adbhut that is attached to it. So it helps
Right.
us remember. Every time it should not be taken literally. Many times it has to be understood metaphorically or figuratively.
Mhm. We have from Sanjay Bapat is how can these dates of Ramayana and Mahabharata be then used to find the physical evidence which corroborates with these to conclusively put this question to the bed?
Yeah,
I'll
great.
add to that. I'll add
Yeah,
to that.
please go
Can
ahead.
these questions ever be put to the bed? Is that even a possibility? Or
Hmm.
should these be? I mean, shouldn't
Yeah.
discovery be ongoing process?
Yeah, well, both are great questions. So let me answer that first, and if I forget,
Yeah.
Neil, you would remind me.
Yeah.
So how can these dates of Ramayana and Mahabharata be used to find physical evidence? This is not even a future possibility.
Mhm.
So I started my journey with astronomy evidence, both in case of Ramayana and Mahabharata.
Yeah.
But so that's 2011, 2014. So since then, so 10 years or 6 years, I have shown with enormous empirical evidence
Yeah.
from dozen plus different disciplines of science, And these are like all physical evidences. So what am I talking? Geology, geophysics, geochemistry,
Mhm.
morphodynamics of rivers, so hydrology evidence, oceanography, climatology, geology, I mean that's geography,
Yeah.
linguistics, paleontology, physical anthropology, genetics. I mean, I can go on and on. From all of that, if the evidence exists, meaning if the evidence, somebody has found it and the evidence exists, all the evidence to this day supports, or scientific language corroborates, the 12,209 BC for Ramayana,
Yeah.
5561 BC for a Mahabharata. So it's not a just a future possibility; it is a reality. And
Right.
what was your question, Neil?
I'm saying that can these questions ever be put to bed, and
Uh, uh,
should they be put to bed?
Correct. I would say we don't need to write a final line, on the
Mhm.
in the stone, saying, "Hey, no, we are never ever going to argue about this debt ever." No, we don't need to do that. However, just like what happens in science, the modern science provides us a good example how to behave when it comes to our history.
Yeah.
For example, right now, there is no confusion in anyone's mind that between Einstein's theory and Newton's theory, which one is better?
Yeah.
Between Newton's theory and Kepler's theory, which one is better? And between Kepler's and Copernicus and Ptolemy. So at any given time, by luck, and in this case that is possible, we can always talk about the best approximation to the truth, the best claim among all that is available. And I'm
Mhm.
asserting that that is 12,209 BC and 5561 BC, but I'm not holding gun to anyone's head. I said, come critique it, debate with me, argue against it, come up with an alternate claim. But if you don't want to do any of this, then I don't have a time for you. Go take a hike.
I have one last question from Shyam Kumar Das, who just wants your comments on Vimanas.
What my comments on Vimanas? No, I can give the quick comments on Vimanas.
Yeah.
Vimanas, as described, even as flying vehicles. It is described in Ramayana like Pushpak Viman.
Yeah.
Many people don't know, but actually Mahabharata also describes Vimana, just
Mhm.
not in the context of Mahabharata war. Okay, so yes, the descriptions are there. Now what to make of it, I don't know only in this sense. I know exactly what to make of them, but if somebody asks me to, in a scientific fashion, to prove their existence, I will not able to do it. I don't have the evidence. However, just for a minute, let's look at quickly Ramayana. If you and I would encourage people to read Valmiki Ramayana right from the Balakanda all the way to the Uttarakanda. Everywhere the description of Pushpak Viman comes, and all of us have flown on a plane in our
Yeah.
times,
Yeah.
especially those who are frequent flyers. They have seen the turbulence and every single thing. If you accumulate, and I have done that, if you put together and list all the descriptions of Pushpak Viman, the description, that's all we have. We
Yeah.
don't have a engine, we don't have a map or nothing. We don't know what fuel they used, you know.
Right.
But if you look at the descriptions, you'll be amazed how those descriptions are very close, right on the money with our air travel.
Right.
So I'll just leave it at that. That's all we can talk about.
So, before closing, I have one last question to ask you. That in this academic space, uh, for a very long time, we followed for scriptures, even for the ancient Indian archaeology, everything was initiated during British period.
Hmm.
That was the academic line that we have followed for a very long time.
Yeah.
Are we seeing a shift from that, and are we seeing more interest from people within India trying to discover the truth about it, or trying to follow a, if I could use the word, that putting an Indian lens on it, and then from that perspective trying to discover? Do we
Okay.
see that rising and that coming up more?
Okay. So, well, I mean, I am doing it for last 25, 30 years.
Yeah.
There are many now new partners in crime who are
Mhm.
working with me. So that's definitely there. In terms of people following it, and I don't mean just the following in a ordinary man, but people from academia, people from business community, it's absolutely happening. Now, are there people still stuck in the old paradigms, like archaeology is the only way and
Yeah.
stuff like that? Of course they are. But that is their problem. I don't make it my problem.
Right. Right.
They have to come out of it, and the only way they are going to come out of is a bootstrapping, which is what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita: Uddare natmana manam natmanam avasadayet. Only you can bring yourself out of, you can be your best enemy, you can be your what do you call, a best friend, worst enemy.
Right. So, thanks, Nilesh. On that point, we will close this. We are close to 1 hour now, and
Sure.
thanks a lot for joining us and having this very interesting and insightful conversation. Thank you, everyone who joined this call live and stayed through the end for great questions and contributions that all of you made. And yeah, thank you, everyone, for joining in. Thanks, Nilesh. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Neil.
Bye.